Thanks for joining us on this gray and rainy Friday. My name is Dan Fingus, and I'm the Climate Action Coordinator for Vermont Natural Resources Council. Welcome to the Tracking Vermont's Energy Transition at the Local Level, an introduction to Energy Action Network's dashboards and data tools webinar. This is a part of our series of winter webinars that provides education, tools, and support to local energy leaders. I hope you can join us at a future webinar, including the Weatherization Repayment Assistance Program webinar that's on March 27th. I'll drop the registration link for that in the chat. Speaking of the chat, we will be doing a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Please put any questions you think of into the chat, and we will get to as many as we can. Today's webinar, we are lucky to have the Energy Action Network team here with us to discuss tracking Vermont's energy transition at the local level. Not only does the EAN host a diverse network of organizations and public agencies, they also bring us some of the most compelling climate data. Crucial data we need to ensure that we are hitting climate obligations as a state. Today's lead presenter from EAN is Lena Steyer. Lena is EAN's data manager and research analyst. Previously, she has supported climate and sustainability research projects with Global Footprint Network and the CGIAR research program on climate change, agriculture, and food security. Welcome, Lena.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It's great to see so many people on. So today we're going to be kind of walking through two of our new dashboards that we've recently published. So one of them is looking at tracking progress of key energy measures that were identified in Vermont's Climate Action Plan and tracking those at the local level. And the other one is focusing more on statewide level greenhouse gas emissions. So we're going to kind of get into that later on and do a demo of those dashboards later on in the webinar, but I want to hand it over to Cara to do a brief introduction to EAN.
Yeah, so hello everyone, so nice to see you. For any of you who don't know Energy Action Network, we are a nonprofit organization and a broad network of folks around the state who are working together to achieve Vermont's climate and energy commitments in ways that create a more just, thriving, and sustainable future. Next slide. So EAN is, as a network, brings together a lot of different organizations, over 100 different network members and organizations, including all of those that you see on this slide and many more. And next slide. We also have a lot of public sector partners that we work with. Next slide. So one of the things that we do is that we bring people together in what we call network action teams. And these are groups of network members and public sector partners working together to create solutions to some of the pressing challenges we have to reach our climate commitments. So those are working on things like, how do we grow the climate workforce that we need to do all of this work to meet our climate commitments? You can see some of the other network action teams listed on this slide as well. And if anyone is at all interested in learning more about these, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Next slide, Lena.
Awesome.
Back over to you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Cara. So the other kind of big side of our work is the research, data, and analysis side. So the biggest thing that we do on this piece each year is publish the annual progress report for Vermont, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And then in addition to that, we also publish a lot of research papers, research briefs, fact sheets. We host webinars like this one, and we do monthly speaker series events. And EAN is dedicated to producing high quality, open, and accessible research and analysis that supports the state's progress towards its energy and climate commitments. So in addition to our annual progress report and some of the other work that I just mentioned, we are now working to build out some additional resources and tools for individuals, organizations, and communities throughout the state to have greater access to the data and resources that are available. So before I jump into kind of giving an overview of the new dashboards, I wanted to provide some history on the previous community energy dashboard that as many of you might be familiar with. This tool was actually created in 2016, and it was done in partnership with the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund and others. And this dashboard was originally designed to track progress towards the goals of the 2016 Comprehensive Energy Plan. So it was created and set up and designed prior to the passage of the Vermont's Global Warming Solutions Act and prior to the creation of Vermont's Climate Action Plan in 2021. So due to some technical challenges and costs and some limitations to the data availability of that dashboard, the original design of it just kind of became unsustainable for us. And we wanted to move towards a more accessible, a more streamlined kind of design for folks to be able to access this type of data. So we wanted to kind of bring over a lot of the key features and tracking measures that were on that dashboard and retain those and pull them into more accessible, streamlined dashboards, which are hosted now at eanbt.org/dashboards. And one of those is the new Vermont Energy Dashboard. So this was actually published last month in February. And it pulls in data from Efficiency Vermont, BGS, Burlington Electric Department, and a bunch of the state weatherization programs. And it's designed to track progress towards the highest impact measures towards the pathways targets in the Vermont Climate Action Plan. So we wanted it to really be a simple, user-friendly interface and give folks the ability to visualize the data in different ways and download the data and use it in multiple different ways. So this tool, it tracks adoption of the 4 highest impact climate pollution reducing activities that were recommended in the Vermont CAP. So that includes comprehensive home weatherization, cold climate heat pump water heaters, and electric vehicles. And the dashboard gives you the ability to aggregate the data by town, county, and regional planning commission, as well as to view the totals statewide. And it also gives you the ability to visualize progress over time and track kind of the pace of adoption throughout the state or in your county or in your town, and see how that's been kind of moving over time over the years. So I want to jump into kind of a demo of this dashboard. And again, I think we're going to be pausing for questions after each of the dashboard demos. So if you have any questions as I go, feel free to put them into the chat and we'll address those afterwards. Okay, can everyone still see my screen? Yeah. All right, so when you go into the dashboard page on our website, this is the screen that you'll see. Hopefully people can see that well, but I'll make it a little bigger in just a moment. So at the top of the page, there's a brief description similar to everything I just mentioned about the dashboard. The dashboard itself, you can see here. And then scrolling down a little bit more, if you're playing around with this on your own, there's some brief instructions on how to use the dashboard, ways that you can download the data, and then all the information about sources and documentation and everything is at the bottom there. So I just want to share full screen here. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. So as I mentioned previously, the dashboard allows you to view the data by town, county, and regional planning commission. So you'll see that that's kind of the first prompt at the top of the dashboard to choose the geographic level that you want to view the data by. So it automatically will start off with showing you the town level data, and then you can adjust that as you want. And then at the top left-hand side of the dashboard, you can see the measures that I mentioned before. So you can select which one you want to visualize here. And then if you hover over this little eye icon at the top, you'll pull up a little bit more information about what exactly is included in each of those measures, how we're defining them, and just to kind of run through that a little bit. For cold climate heat pumps, we're defining that as, or we're just showing residential installations. So it doesn't include commercial installations of cold climate heat pumps. And heat pump water heaters, we're just looking at the residential level here. So that includes single head and multi-head heat pumps, centrally ducted heat pumps, air to water heat pumps, And these are just heat pumps, and same with heat pump water heaters. They're just units that have received incentives from Efficiency Vermont or Burlington Electric Department. So there may be a few, like a small number of heat pumps that are installed throughout the state that aren't included in those totals, but it should be most of the heat pumps installed throughout the time that we cover throughout Vermont included in this data set because the Efficiency Vermont incentives are point of sale incentives. So most should be covered by this data. One other thing I wanted to note is that when we're talking about heat pumps here, we're referring to the outdoor units, not the individual indoor heads. So one heat pump in this data would be one outdoor unit, and it might have, 2-3 heads inside the house. And a home might also have more than one outdoor unit installed. Similarly, heat pump water heaters includes residential installations for which incentives were received through Efficiency Vermont or BED programs. Weatherization it includes all residential comprehensive weatherization projects. So that term comprehensive is defined by the state of Vermont. They have to meet a certain threshold of efficiency improvements to qualify for that. And we do, I believe, have some more information on that on the webpage. And then electric vehicles kind of is a snapshot in time of the number of EVs registered in the state of Vermont. And that includes all electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So below that, you can see that we have a map of Vermont here, and that is a heat map. And the way that that is shaded is kind of it's not based off of the number of units installed in a town. It's based off of the number of units, or let's say heat pumps. We'll go with heat pumps for now. It's based off of the number of heat pumps per housing unit in that town. So it's a way of kind of adjusting for differences in population, differences in the number of housing units in different towns, and being able to compare across geographic areas throughout Vermont. So you can see that the darker shaded colors here are the towns that have a higher concentration of heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, weatherization installed in those towns. And those with lighter colors have a lower concentration. And then if you hover over any town here, you can also see the total number in addition to that per housing unit number. So one other filter that you can use is this year filter, and that really is to adjust the data that you're visualizing on the map below. So we can kind of view how that map is changing through time, how the distribution throughout the state is changing through time. And it also adjusts this total box over here that's showing the cumulative total number of heat pumps installed, and that year, if you select 2019, that's showing how many there were through the end of 2019 in Vermont. And then looking at the top right-hand side of the dashboard here, we have this bar graph that shows, as I mentioned before, the pace of adoption of each measure throughout the state. So what we're showing here is the cumulative total in each year. So it's not the number of additional installed units or additional projects completed in that year. It's the cumulative total across all of the previous years. So if you wanted to figure out, how many heat pumps were installed in 2022, you could simply subtract the 2021 value from the 2022, and you would get the ones installed just in that year. But this is saying, we have over 47,000 heat pumps that have been installed throughout the history of the heat pump programs in Vermont. Yeah, and then so right below that, like I mentioned, you have this box where you can view that cumulative total. It says 2019 right now, but wanted to bring it back to 2022. Okay, there we go. And then lastly here, we have this other bar graph that's looking at statewide, where are we relative to what the climate action plan pathways are kind of recommending that we need to be. So where are we relative to those future targets in the climate action plan? So you can see as of 2022, this is going to be higher now. In 2024, I think in 2023, we were at like 60,000 heat pumps, but in 2022, we had over 47,000 installed in the state. And you can kind of visualize that relative to where we need to be in 2030 at almost 170,000. So I want to just walk through a couple examples of how you can kind of filter and select towns and change the data that you're showing here. So looking at cold climate heat pumps, if you go down to a town, you can see it says click on a town to filter. So you can select any town here. Let's say go with Waterbury. And if you select Waterbury here, you can obviously view the number of heat pumps per housing unit, and then heat pumps, the cumulative total number of heat pumps there, which is also showing up in this box here. So there are 707 heat pumps have been installed or were installed in Waterbury through the end of 2022. And then it also filters this graph here at the top. So you can see the pace of adoption of cold climate heat pumps in Waterbury over time. And you can do that for any town and kind of view how that's changed over time in any town there. So now I'll go over to the county page. So very similar, it all looks the same except for the map down here, where you can just, instead of seeing towns, you're seeing counties. And maybe we'll look at weatherization for this one. So weatherization, we have data going back through 2010. So similarly, you can choose a county. You choose Windsor County here, and it'll filter this graph, and you can kind of see how the pace of adoption is looking from 2010 through 2022 in Windsor County, and what the cumulative total weatherization projects completed were in Windsor County. And again, you'll notice that this number doesn't change when you filter it by a geographic location, and that's just because we don't have, in the climate action plan, it didn't identify targets for individual towns or counties. It's just a statewide target. So there are ways that we could potentially estimate like what those relative targets would be in each town. And it's something that we might add to the dashboard in the future, but for now, we're just looking at the statewide targets there. And then lastly, we can go over to the Regional Planning Commission level. And we can see that the map changed again, and maybe this time we can filter it by EVs. I want to bring that back to 2020. And you'll notice that with EVs, the bar graph looks a little bit different here because we're breaking it down into all electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid EVs. So you can see how that kind of relative distribution of all electric vehicles and PHEVs has kind of changed over time. So like back in 2014, 2015, the majority of the EVs registered in the state were plug-in hybrids. Coming up through 2022, you can see that now the majority are actually all electric vehicles, and it's kind of an increasing share of all electric vehicles there. So once again, you can filter by a regional planning commission. So let's choose Rutland Regional Planning Commission. And you can see this bar graph changing over time. And like I said before, this is kind of more of a snapshot in time, whereas the other ones were better described as cumulative totals. So this would actually be like the total EVs registered at a certain date in 2022 in that regional planning commission. And down below, we can see that this was in 2022. We know that the number of EVs, I believe, is up to over 12,000 throughout the state now. But we can see kind of that big gap between where we are as of 2022 versus where we need to be in 2030. Okay. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about on this dashboard, and probably the most helpful piece of this demo, because Tableau, which is the software that we built this dashboard on, is not super intuitive when it comes to sharing data and downloading the data. So I want to walk through a couple ways that you can do that. So I'm just going to go out of full screen here, and I hope everyone can see this okay. So at the bottom of the dashboard here, there's this lighter gray bar, and there's several different buttons here that you can play around with. But the two that I want to talk about are this share button and then this download button here. So I'll start with the share one. This allows you to share a link to the dashboard or to insert or embed the dashboard in your own website. So if you have a website that you want to be able to share this data on, you can actually just embed this entire dashboard into it very easily using this embed code. And one cool thing about that is you'll see here, you have the option for current view versus original view. So original view is just gonna embed the dashboard as it was when you first opened it. So that would be this view on town, cold climate heat pumps 2022. It's just going to embed that original view. But then if you like make a few changes, you select weatherization and you go by RPC. Oop. Go back to weatherization. Let's say you wanted to just have it on the Rutland Regional Planning Commission and be able to embed that view of the dashboard. You can go down to the share button and you have selected current view, and then you'd be able to embed that or share the link. And it's, if you send that link to someone and they open it up, it's going to be with all of those kind of filters and settings that you put in. So that is a cool way of doing that and being able to share the data. And then the second button is this download button. So that is how you can either download an image of the entire view of the dashboard. So instead of taking a screenshot of it, you can go down here and click that download button and then download an image, and then I'll just download a PNG of the full dashboard view. And then there's two options. I'm mostly going to talk about these three options at the top because they're the most relevant. But you can also download PDF, PowerPoint, or the entire workbook. But if you were just looking to download like a snapshot of the data or just the image, you would want to use one of these three buttons here. So one of the easier ways to do it, if you wanted to just download the data from one of these graphs or from the map, is just to click this crosstab button. And then here you can see the map shows up. It's pretty small there, but you can choose which piece of the dashboard you want to download data from. So if you wanted to download the bar graph for weatherization, it has that selected there. You would just hit download. And then you pull that over onto the right screen. And then it would just download an Excel file with the data on it. So if you wanted to pull that out and use it somewhere else, it's an easy way of downloading the data. And then a similar way to do it is clicking data instead of crosstab. This is very small. I'm sorry, you can't see that super well. Make that a little bit bigger. But if you wanted to download like the full data from the dashboard, you could go here. And another way that you could do this, if you wanted like just this bar graph instead of doing, it's probably easier to do the crosstab way, but you could select all of those bars, go to data, and it'll show all of the numbers that are on those bars. And then you can just hit download there, and that's another way of downloading the data. Okay, I just went through a lot of information. I want to pause here and give an opportunity to answer some questions. I see there's some activity in the chat.
Yes, there is, Lena. couple, we have 4 or 5 questions. The first, when will the 2023 data be added?
Yes, so we get the data from Efficiency Vermont, and they have a process of kind of verifying all of that data. And I believe the 2023 data will be added or will be available to us in June. So once we get that, we'll make sure to add it as quickly as possible. So it should be around June, maybe July.
Great. The second question, is there a way to switch from cumulative to yearly or see more granular trends in adoption?
There is not a way like on this graph to be able to view the annual installations. That is something that we could consider doing in the future if that's something that a lot of people would be interested in. But like I said, if you wanted to kind of see what the annual levels of adoption are, you can kind of extract that number by doing like some subtraction from the cumulative, but yeah, not at the moment.
Okay. The next 3 questions are about kind of things that we may not be in this tool yet, but there are some questions on. So will solar panels per town be shown at some time? GMP would have that info, right?
Yes, so that is another piece of the previous dashboard that we have gotten some feedback that would be helpful to kind of bring over into a new dashboard. So we are working on trying to get that data. The way that we did it previously was kind of a time-intensive process, so that's why it hasn't been done yet. But hopefully at some point it'll either be added to this dashboard or on a different dashboard.
Great. One from Linda Gray, per Act 174 and enhanced energy plans, there are town targets for renewable energy generation. Would be good to compare installed capacity with target capacity. So is there any way to put what's being done against what the targets are?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think if you're referring to just targets for renewable energy generation, that could be something we incorporate into whatever dashboard we end up creating for the renewable energy generation piece. As I just mentioned, I don't know, I'm not aware of whether a lot of towns have like heat pump or weatherization targets, like town-specific targets, but if there are, I think that would be awesome to add to this one. But definitely a place to explore a little bit more.
Great. And then what about in-state generation of renewable energy for the state or for towns? What about the level of GHG emission by state, possibly by town? Are these metrics being developed?
So kind of answering the second part of that question first. In a couple of minutes, I'm going to go into our GHG emissions dashboard. So that is looking at statewide emissions. We don't, and that's coming from the data, the inventory that's produced by the Agency of Natural Resources. So that just shows statewide data. We don't have kind of a town by town level emissions data set at the moment. Or county level. So it's not going to be able to be broken down in the same way that this is by geographic level. Sorry, what was the first part of that question again?
What about in-state generation of renewable energy for the state or for towns? So like specifically in-state generation and seeing where
Right.
it's
So that,
happening and how
yeah,
much.
I guess that would be captured by that same kind of data set or dashboard that I was talking about earlier with regards to solar. That would kind of cover not just solar, but also like wind, hydro, all the in-state distributed generation.
Great. There's a question for the heat pump data. Some folks, put in heat pumps prior to rebates. Is this data all from rebates, or is it estimated based on, prior adoption and rebate?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is all from the rebates, so it's not going to capture any heat pumps that were installed prior to this tracking that Efficiency Vermont does. So if you see on our dashboard here, that heat pump data only goes back to 2015. So certainly there are people throughout the state who are installing heat pumps prior to 2015, but this is just reflecting those that qualified for the rebates or incentives.
Great. And then, and this may not be a question you can answer. What is the state's definition of comprehensive weatherization? Is this definition available? So what definition are we using for weatherization? Is it just numbers from Efficiency Vermont, or is there a definition?
I cannot remember what the state definition is off the top of my head. But that information certainly is available somewhere. I just know that the data that we receive from Efficiency Vermont and the other weatherization programs, what they're sending us is just the ones that qualify as comprehensive weatherization projects. But I definitely will look into that, and I'll add that definition onto this webpage, because I actually don't think that I have that on here right now. But that's a great question. I'll definitely add that.
Great. And you let me know, Lena, when we have to move on time-wise to the next thing, because questions keep coming. Since the annual cumulative totals are shown past and future, would it be possible to have the tool also calculate and show the past compound annual growth rate, CAGR, and the future CAGR needed to achieve the targets?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think that would definitely be possible. It's not something that it's not a feature that's built into this dashboard right now, but I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
And I think the last question, and we can always loop back if there's more that folks
Yeah,
think of, but are geothermal heat pumps included in the cold climate heat pumps? If not, where are these included?
I don't believe that geothermal heat pumps are included.
And so if they're not, they're just not in the data sets that you have access to.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are all the questions so far.
Okay, great. So if anyone has any more questions on this dashboard, feel free to keep putting them in the chat and we can go back to them later on. But I'm just going to go back to the slides and dive into the other dashboard that I want to talk about, which is our statewide GHG emissions dashboard. So this was published in September of 2023, kind of alongside our annual progress report. And like I said, it pulls in data from the Agency of Natural Resources greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So that data is on a bit of a time lag. So it goes through 2020, and it's going to be updated on an annual basis. So the next update is going to be probably in June this year, with data going through 2021. So it's 1990 through 2020 data right now. And we created this dashboard to kind of provide more accessible and interactive visualization of that GHG emissions data, and so that people can kind of explore it by sector and over time, and having it be kind of a complementary tool to the information that we have in our annual progress report, or that's in the actual emissions inventory from ANR. And our goal with this tool is for us to be able to track Vermont's progress towards GHG reduction requirements that were established by the Vermont Global Warming Solutions Act. So that's just a snapshot of the dashboard. We'll go into that in a second. So this dashboard allows you to visualize data by sector. Like I said, we have several pages that are specifically focusing on the energy sectors, so thermal, transportation, and electricity. And then in those sectors, you can view the emissions by fuel type, like where those emissions are coming from, the emission sources, as well as over time by year. Okay. Oh, and quickly before I jump into that, I meant to mention this before, but we'll put the links to these dashboards in the chat. But if you're ever on our website and you want to kind of quickly find the dashboards, you can go up here. You can either hover over dashboards and you'll see both of those dashboards linked there. And we also created this dashboards page on our website where, you know, if we add any new dashboards or data tools, they'll be added to this page, and you can kind of get to the dashboards through there as well. Okay, make that full screen again. So when you open up to the dashboard, it starts off on this kind of overall emissions page. And you might recognize this graph on the top as one that we've kind of produced several years in a row for the annual progress report as like a static graph. And we wanted to kind of have that in there in a more interactive way, so you can kind of explore the data a bit more than, when you're just looking at the annual progress report. So here you can view Vermont's historical greenhouse gas emissions over time from 1990 through 2020. And then we also have the future requirements established by the Global Warming Solutions Act, and how we kind of need to ramp down emissions over time to meet those requirements through 2050. And down below, we have a little bit of information about the Global Warming Solutions Act, kind of some background, and then you can also look at the emissions by sector in this pie chart as well. And kind of going with the interactive pieces of this, there's several ways that you can filter the data here. So if you see on this right-hand side, you have this menu where you can choose which sectors you want to show. So right now we have all selected. You can unselect that. And let's say you just wanted to look at the thermal sector. So if you click on thermal, you can see historical thermal emissions over time, and those labels have changed. So this is thermal sector emissions in 2020 rather than the previous labels, which were economy-wide or overall emissions. And then you can see the specific thermal sector targets where we need to be by 2025, 2030, and 2050 to meet the Global Warming Solutions Act requirements. And if you wanted to, let's say, just view the energy sectors kind of stacked up there, you can just select those three and you'll see that. So yeah, you can kind of play around with that in different ways. And an alternative way of filtering that data is also just to click on any of these segments in the pie chart below. So if you click on thermal here, it'll just show the historical emissions, not the targets. So you can kind of get a closer look at how emissions have changed over time since 1990 in the thermal sector. And play around with that, do it with transportation, different ways to interact with that. And like I said, we do have specific pages on thermal, transportation, and electricity, those three sectors. So going into the thermal sector here, we have kind of a similar graph showing 1990 through 2020 thermal emissions, and you can kind of see that alongside this black line here, which is showing heating degree days. So that's kind of a measure of how cold a winter is, or how many days out of a year temperatures are below a certain level. It's kind of a difficult to define number, but basically, the higher the number of heating degree days, the higher the statewide heating load is that year. And you can see how that kind of tracks along with the thermal sector emissions here, which is interesting. And similar with the previous one, you can kind of filter by the different sectors. This one is kind of set up differently, but if you just wanted to look at, or not sectors, sorry, fuel sources. So if you just wanted to look at the thermal sector emissions that come from fuel oil consumption in Vermont, you can click on that. And if you click keep only, then it'll just show the fuel oil related thermal sector emissions there. And if you make a change like that, maybe you press keep only by accident and you're like, where did all the data go? You can always click this little undo button at the top and it'll bring you back to the original screen. And then at the bottom here, we have a little bit more detail about thermal sector emissions, and you can also filter these pie charts by year. So this one on the bottom left-hand side is looking at the subsectors. So how are thermal emissions broken down by residential, commercial, and industrial use? And with these pie charts as well, you can also use them to filter the data that's shown up above. So you can click on residential here. And now this bar graph up above is just showing residential emissions. And same with the pie chart here. So you can see for overall fuel oil, for example, is 46% of the thermal emissions. And if you click on residential, it's just showing residential emissions by fuel. So fuel oil goes up to 53% of residential emissions. So there's different ways you can play around with that. And then, like I said, you can filter the year. Like if you want to look at 2010, the pie graphs for 2010, you can filter that. Different ways you can play around with that data. On the transportation side, it's kind of similar presentation of the data, where you can see from 1990 through 2020 where the transportation sector emissions are coming from, like what the fuel sources are. So you can see that in the blue, that's motor gasoline, and that represents the majority of emissions. And then diesel is a big chunk, and then there's like a few other little fuels that contribute to Vermont's transportation emissions. And then you can also visualize it in the pie chart down here, similar to thermal. And if you wanted to just filter the top graph and only view the emissions from motor gasoline, you can do that, as well as filter the year that this pie chart is showing. And lastly, we have a page of the dashboard that is looking at electricity emissions. So very similar to the previous ones, you can see how it breaks down by sources of electricity. And if you hover over that, you can see the full label, but the majority of our electricity emissions in Vermont come from the ISO New England system mix. And then there's, small amounts from wood in the past 3 years. There have been no emissions from oil or fossil gas in Vermont, and this is, after REC accounting and everything, renewable energy credit accounting. Yeah, and you can go back through the years and look at how that mix has changed over time. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to cover with the emissions dashboard. Open up to questions.
Yeah, we've got a lot. Oops, as I move off the questions mistakenly. So we've got some data questions. First is, why does the benchmark shift from below 2005 levels to below 1990 levels?
Great question. First, before we get into these questions, I just want to say that I'm going to try my best to answer them, but since this is data that's put together by the Agency of Natural Resources, not by EAN, there's probably some things that I don't know the answer to. So just wanted to preface with that. But the question was, why does the baseline shift from 2005? I believe for the 2025 target, that is, the baseline is 2005 to align with the targets laid out by the Paris Agreement. And that is why it's 2005 for 2025. And then since the central target of the Paris Agreement was for 2025, the state of Vermont chose, or the legislature chose 1990. I'm not positive about that answer, so I don't know if Jared, you want to jump in at all?
Yeah, thanks, Lena. Yeah, so in the Global Warming Solutions Act, the legal obligations, the targets were set by the legislature to mirror the international commitments. So the 1990 baseline refers back to the Kyoto Protocol targets, and 2005 was the baseline that was used in the Paris Accord targets. So that's why there's different baselines. They just shift based on the international accords that the United States was involved with at different periods of time.
I got that half right.
Well, speaking of 1990, Stephen would like to know, will 1990 town level baseline data ever be available? or is it just not achievable because the data wasn't collected at the time? Do we do a projection backwards for towns that have goals based on 1990 levels? How do we start? Where and or how do we start?
That is a great question. I am not quite sure how you would kind of begin with that. I think that would be something that's more done at the town level. I do know that you can go back and calculate that 1990 data if you have, or 1990 emissions if you have the data on fuel use, fuel consumption in that year for your town. But I know that that is not necessarily easy data to come by and probably maybe not even possible. So I think that would be kind of the first step, is seeing like if there's a way to get data on fuel consumption in each of the sectors that far back, but I don't know.
All right. I know Jared has just dropped into the chat. There was a question about the methodology for the analysis and how things are calculated. That is something that can be found on the state website. And we can make sure we provide that link in the follow-up email as well for folks who might be watching this after the initial recording. We'll move to the next question. The 2025 benchmark is coming up soon. Has anyone done thinking or writing on whether the state, regions, or towns are meeting their 2025 targets? 2025 is the first milestone year set by Act 174. Looking for ways to characterize this in regional and town energy plan updates.
I don't know if I could speak as much to the town level as statewide. So if there's anyone who wants to jump in on town level, I think that would be helpful, because I don't think I can provide the best answer on that.
Jared, is this something that you?
In terms of emissions projections, everything that we either that EAN has worked on or that state agencies have worked on has been statewide. There hasn't been a sub-regional or town level emissions tracking.
And is there writing on how we are doing compared to the statewide goals or obligations for 2025?
Yeah, and there were a couple of presentations on that, both from the Agency of Natural Resources and then from EAN at a Climate Council meeting at the end of January. And I will get both of those links and put them in the chat if folks want to look at those.
Thanks for that, Jared. So then the last question I think we have right now, Lena, is a question of use. Is it still better for towns to have their own town-specific dashboards, or easier or more accurate to rely on the state dashboard?
I mean, I think that really depends on what kind of data you are looking to visualize, or what you're hoping to do with that dashboard. I think, in terms of the emissions one, obviously we just have statewide. So if there are specific towns that are trying to, do or have done or are trying to do their own town level emissions inventories, then that would be something that would be done at the town level. I think that there are other metrics that towns are doing a better job of tracking for, their own geographic region, or towns or counties or RPCs are doing a better job of tracking than kind of the statewide data sources that we have. So I think it really just depends on data availability and what you're kind of trying to do with that.
Great. I'm not seeing any fresh questions in the chat right now.
Okay, great. Looks like we have about 9 minutes left. One thing that, oh, I had another slide. And I already said that. Okay, yes. Updates, I'll just repeat this again. Updates to these dashboards, it seems like given the timeline of data availability, both of the dashboards will be updated this summer, probably in June, and then they'll be updated on an annual basis going forward. And in the last 9 minutes, we kind of wanted to open it up to folks if anyone wants to kind of do some thinking about either of these questions that we have to pose to you, or it's kind of our like reverse Q&A that we came up with. So one question, if anyone wants to kind of jump in or answer in the chat, just to kind of get some conversation started. How do you imagine using either of these dashboards in your town's work? And what features or capabilities would you like to see in these tools in the future or in other tools? And I know that we've gotten some really great suggestions from people already, but if anyone wants to kind of pop those in the chat or raise your hand. I see Melanie, you have your hand up.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Also appreciate the link that Jared just provided about emissions targets. My question was also about the targets for EVs and cold climate heat pumps and weatherizations. Towns and regions that have enhanced energy plans have those targets, but not all municipalities have enhanced energy plans. So in terms of future capabilities, it might make sense to consider adding cold climate weatherization and EV targets at the regional level, because I think that's a complete set of targets for the state, but with town level targets. Like I said, not all municipalities have enhanced regional plans.
Right. Okay.
But love the
But all
dashboard.
The
Great
RPCs
work.
do, sorry.
Yeah, all our regional planning commissions in the state have regional enhanced energy plans, which require that we have targets consistent with the Act 174 milestones. So that could be an additional enhancement. I know as we're starting to update the first round of energy plans that were adopted a few years ago, I'm getting questions about how we're meeting our 2025 targets. It may not be possible to report on that given the lag in data. But overall, love the dashboard. Thank you for all your work on it. It looks great and it looks very usable.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And yeah, that's really helpful.
A few other comments about how they would use it, or what they might want. Town level GHG emissions would be great. Jack Schneider says probably looking to embed the town level stats into the Energy Committee section of the town website with the goal of showing progress or lack thereof.
Great, that's awesome.
We do have some questions, but I want to make sure you take anybody else who wants to answer your question. Hearing none, there's a tech question around the embedding. When you embed the dashboard, let's say, since this came from Linda Gray, the Norwich town portion of the dashboard in their Energy Committee website, is that a static thing, or is that as you update the dashboard, it will update?
Yeah, that is live. So as I make updates, it'll update. And that's the same way that we embedded it in the EAN website. So yeah. Great question.
Great. Let's see. Stephen Dotson wants to know how are towns supposed to measure their own goals without a sense of the baseline? Is there any direction that towns could use to make sure we're using the same methodology for establishing that at least?
Sorry, I was just reading the question.
This feels like maybe a further need and maybe a further conversation that needs to happen. And I'm sure it's a conversation that RPCs are, as they create enhanced energy plans for their regions, are thinking about as well. And then we have Jeff Dexter offering to share a survey that they sent out to Sunderland residents, concentrating on what energy efficiency actions they've already taken. So Jeff, if you get me that survey you've used, I'm happy to add that as part of the follow-up email to this webinar, so everyone who registered gets that sample and that example.
Dan and Lena, if it's okay, I just want to go back to Stephen's question and offer a thought on it because it's a really interesting question. And it's a great point that without a baseline for towns, it's difficult for them to kind of set targets and track progress in the same way that we're doing at a statewide level. I think one of the conceptual challenges that we've run into when we've thought about this and discussed this is what's the appropriate way to do it? Do we just take the statewide targets and kind of divide it by population and look at kind of a per capita responsibility? That feels like a kind of straightforward way to do it, but it discounts concerns around energy equity and different towns having different resources to be able to make the changes that would reduce emissions, especially given that so many of these measures require upfront investments, often to achieve long-term savings in addition to climate pollution reduction. But to me, I guess I would just invite more conversation or thoughts on that because it's not an incredibly straightforward way and or obvious way to translate statewide goals to town or region specific goals.
All right. Lena, do you have any concluding thoughts?
Whoops. Oh, I meant to put my email on the last slide and it looks like it didn't get added into there. So if anyone has any other questions going forward or any suggestions or comments on how we might improve these dashboards, or if you notice anything not working on the dashboard, just feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat in just a moment. But yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much everyone for joining. Yeah, thanks.
And yep, thanks everyone. Appreciate you being here today. And I want to thank Lena and the whole EAN team for presenting on this really important toolkits or dashboards, and really appreciate that they're putting in this hard work, looking at this data, trying to bring the data to us in a really easily accessible way. There's always more data, there's always more questions that we want answered, but really taking on some really important pieces. So hopefully you all will join us for future webinars, including the March 27th Weatherization Repayment Assistance Program webinar. And I hope you all have a great weekend.